In the sweltering, unforgiving heat of Dubai's summer, the lives of 300 passengers aboard Emirates Flight 521 hang in the balance. A single, crucial decision by the pilots in the face of an unstable landing would set off a gripping, high-stakes race against time, where every second counts. As the pilots struggle to maintain control, battling the unexpected and powerful wind shear on their approach, the tense atmosphere within the cockpit is palpable. In these critical moments, the crew must rely on their training, their instincts, and their trust in each other as they wrestle to maintain control of the aircraft and bring it safely to the ground. Unbeknownst to the passengers, their fate is being determined by every move the pilots make. As the plane descends, it enters a deadly dance with the runway, floating perilously above it. The pilots grapple with their decision to land or abort, weighing the risks against the rapidly diminishing window of opportunity. But fate has other plans. Emirates, the Emirati airline, is widely regarded as one of the greatest in the world. Dubai, in the Middle East, serves as the airline's worldwide hub, making it an excellent stopover for many travelers and helping Emirates become a world leader in passenger air travel. They have impressively never had any deadly accident, but that was before this day on August 3, 2016. Emirates started simplifying their fleet of aircraft in the 2010s and will primarily fly Airbus A380 and Boeing 777 planes by the time 2016 came around. The 777 comes in a variety of versions, much like any other aircraft. Emirates used a variety of Boeing 777 models since it was the biggest 777 operator. The Type's 300 model is an expanded version of the 200 model. Later, the 300 would undergo additional development to become the 777-300ER, which is by far the most well-known. The accident aircraft belonged to the harder-to-find standard 300 type, of which only around 60 were made. The ER was created for extended range, thus the ER suffix. The 777-300 involved in the disaster was delivered to Emirates in 2003 and had flown more than 13,000 flights over the course of 13 years. The plane took off from the Indian city at 10:36 a.m. for a 3.5-hour flight to the Emirates. There were 2 pilots operating the aircraft. The Emirati captain's name was never given in writing, but what is certain is that the 34-year-old male captain had roughly 7,500 total flight hours and had been working for Emirates for 15 years when the disaster occurred. We have additional information regarding the first officer. Australian-born First Officer Jeremy Webb was 37 years old. Remarkably, with just under 8,000 flying hours under his belt, he had more experience than the captain. Yet, the captain had greater flight time on the 777. When passengers, pilots, and flight attendants are included, there were precisely 300 individuals on board aircraft 521. The events that followed the plane's first touchdown on the runway are what make this example of an aviation incident, which happened to take place in Dubai, extremely noteworthy. For extra background, we need to go a little further back than this. The flight's travel to Dubai was unremarkable. The major airport in Dubai has 2 runways, runways 12 and 30 to the left and right respectively. The airport's 2 runways were in the middle, with the terminals and aprons on each side. On this day, Emirates Flight 521 was allowed to make an approach to runway 12 left. Almost an hour before their scheduled arrival, the captain of Flight 521 briefed the first officer. There was a discussion regarding potential wind shear on approach during the briefing. They also spoke about their go-around method throughout this conversation. On all approaches to Dubai, the Meteorological Authority of the United Arab Emirates has issued wind shear advisories. The 2 pilots also briefly discussed their own experiences with wind shear. The first officer said that 3 months had passed since their previous experience with the phenomena. In simple words, wind shear is a considerable change in wind direction over a little distance. The distance of the wind may impact an aircraft's handling since landing pilots often fly into it. While it's usually avoided if at all feasible, contemporary aircraft may have wind shear alarms installed to allow pilots as much time as possible to react in such situations. The reported meteorological data Plus, the fact that Flight 521 was scheduled to land on runway 12 left would indicate that the pilots were encountering a tailwind as they approached the landing zone. Yet, the observed tailwinds were within acceptable ranges of a safe landing. As you would anticipate from Dubai in the summer, it was quite hot. It actually reached just under 49 degrees Celsius. The wind shear at Dubai Airport was caused by the variations in air between the desert and the Persian Gulf. There were 4 other planes in front of Flight 521 with 8 minutes left before the 777 was scheduled to land. 2 of these aircraft had made go-arounds, but the other 2, both Emirates 777s, made a safe landing on the runway. The term go-around means precisely what it says. This approach was intentionally missed in order to fly another approach and to try a different landing. A pilot may desire to execute a go-around for a variety of reasons. It may be anything from the pilot thinking the approach is unstable to runway impediments. While the method may seem unusual to a frequent flyer, go-around training is one of the most standard procedures in pilot training. Just after 12:30 p.m. local time was the time. On its final approach into Dubai, Emirates Flight 521 was in the air. They lowered the landing gear, set the flaps to 30 degrees, and enabled the speed brake so that it would automatically deploy when the aircraft touched down. The speed brake is immediately recognized by passengers as the flap that emerges upward from the wing upon landing. It is one of the few ways a contemporary aircraft may slow down on the runway without severely lowering lift due to the disruption of airflow. The onboard flight data recorder noted a substantial shift in wind direction from a headwind to a tailwind at 12:36 as the aircraft was traveling through barely 700 feet. Once the aircraft had flown past the decision altitude for 18 seconds, the captain informed his first officer that they were preparing to land. Soon after, at 12:37, the first officer informed the captain that the tailwind had increased to 16 knots and was now coming from behind them. At this point, the captain was still taking a steady approach. In fact, when they crossed the runway threshold, it seemed as if the last few seconds of the flight were routine. The aircraft's landing and flare-up followed, which is usually the last stage of a trip. In order to pitch the nose up during the flare maneuver, the captain pushes back on the steering wheel. As there is a lot that occurs in the next seconds, we'll attempt to examine this step by step. The time from the beginning of the flare and the first wheel making touch with the runway was about 11 seconds. After the initial flare, the automatic altitude callouts were made down to 10 feet over the next 4 seconds. According to the accident report, the plane took 5 seconds from the callout of 10 feet to reach a reported height of 7 feet, which made it difficult for the captain to land his aircraft on the runway. As is customary during the flare phase, the captain briefly pushed back on the steering wheel at this period, which caused the nose to pitch from 0.4 degrees to 2.6 degrees. The engines were now at their lowest power level since the auto altitude setting had shifted from guiding speed to idle. In an apparent attempt to land the jet on the runway, the captain alternately pushes and pulls on the control wheel. A left roll input came after that. The 777 had now crossed the runway's target point and was about 480 meters beyond the runway's threshold. I'll use a sentence from the accident report to illustrate the increase in airspeed of 12 knots. The investigation concludes that the 12-knot increase in airspeed was caused by a horizontal wind shear as the wind changed from a tailwind to a headwind component. The wind shift most likely occurred as the aircraft was descending below 7 feet, as this was when the commander, captain, first felt the aircraft being affected by the environmental conditions. The heated air then rises from the plane's undercarriage, slowing its fall. The ensuing rise in height would be caused by this. It's important to keep in mind that during the brief period between the plane flaring and the landing, all of this is occurring while the airplane flies along just slightly over the runway. We should now additionally observe that the pilot's focus has shifted from the main flying displays to the outside world beyond their windows. Indeed, this was consistent with their training. In order to regulate the pitch altitude during the flare, the Flight Crew Instruction Handbook advises pilots to move their visual sighting point to the far end of the runway, as stated in the accident report. Everything came to a head with what pilots refer to as a float. A floaty landing occurs when the aircraft floats up again often unintentionally. The phrase speaks for itself. In this instance, the right undercarriage landing gear made touch with the runway after around 10 seconds of the vehicle floating. Yet, the captain had now made a choice to turn back. Even after trying to lower the nose, the captain felt he just couldn't get the aircraft on the runway. The captain would also add later that they were getting close to the boundary of the touchdown zone, so he decided it was appropriate to do a U-turn and attempt the landing once again. The takeoff go-around switch was depressed. While it was meant to do so, the auto throttle setting stayed at idle. The primary undercarriage landing gear on the runway allowed the 777 to traverse 500 meters in around 6 seconds. The pilots would try to increase their height while starting the go-around. At a speed of somewhat more than 500 feet per minute, the aircraft would start another ascent. The pilots were instructed by air traffic control to soar at a height of 4,000 feet. This was taking into account that the engines were still in the idle state. Neither pilot had made sure there was enough push for a go-around. Not at all. The nose was gently angled into the air and the flaps were pulled to a 20-degree position. After the landing gear touched the runway, an electronic signal was sent out, causing the speed brake to partly deploy. The captain ordered the landing gear to be lifted, evidently oblivious that the aircraft lacked the energy to rise, and the first officer reported the aircraft was climbing at a positive rate. The descent of Emirates Flight 521 would occur a few seconds later at a height of 85 feet above the ground. The captain would observe where the throttles were throughout this descent to the ground and then manually advance them. The 777 struck the runway shortly after, the rear end of the fuselage coming in first. The right wing itself caught on fire when the right engine disengaged from the wing. The 777 rotated to a 250-degree heading. After the collision, the passenger compartment remained mostly undamaged. This significantly increased the accident's survival. As the airplane came to a stop, it still had some electrical power, and the captain made the evacuation announcement over the public address system. 5 of the plane's 10 exits were either closed up or impractical to use. Most passengers used the aft doors to leave the aircraft. Several footage showing people on board the aircraft attempting to get their items from the overhead bins rather than evacuating as quickly as possible as ordered eventually led to criticism of the passengers themselves. Regarding flight safety, there is a regulation. The guideline states that an evacuation of passengers should, in principle, not take longer than 90 seconds to accomplish. Emirates Flight 521's evacuation took close to 7 minutes. The central gasoline tank detonated a little over 2 minutes later. If you ever find yourself in this circumstance, you owe it to yourself to leave your possessions behind, obey the flight attendant's instructions, and get off there when instructed. You may not have the same window of opportunity as these passengers, and you might not be as fortunate. Amazingly, all 300 people in the aircraft made it through, albeit 32 of them reported injuries ranging from slight to serious. Others who attempted to put out the fire also suffered deaths and injuries in this disaster. Heat stroke and other injuries were sustained by many firefighters. The rescue effort for Emirates Flight 521 resulted in the death of 1 firefighter, making it the airline's first and only fatal accident to date. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. If you did, please don't forget to hit the like button and consider subscribing to our channel for more exciting aviation content like this. Your support helps us continue to create and share amazing stories with you.